Okay, now it's recording. I don't know. Okay, so the first question would be, how did you, both of you, got involved in this interesting topic of the PAS?
Go ahead, Jane.
I've been teaching parent education classes for people in legal trouble for many, many years, actually 27 years, continuously. And eventually I started a class called Fathers and Custody, and it was a new area for me entirely. It was about 10 years ago or more. And many of the fathers had parental alienation issues, although I didn't know what it was at the time. But I had two clients that I did a lot of work with, and that's how I got acquainted with them. And as a result of them and others, I wrote an article that's on my website that's gone all around the world, I think. It's called Parents Who Have Successfully Fought Parental Alienation Syndrome. And because I put the word successfully in there, it really caught on. And I heard from people, and then I was off and running. I didn't want to deal with this at all. It was just too terrible. It was too awful. But I ended up just seeming to be a magnet for these issues.
And you, Dr. Brown?
Well, similarly, I mean, I stumbled into it. I mean, I had a general kind of practice, and part of that was working with couples and families, and eventually I noticed that this strange thing was happening where people going through a divorce and a child suddenly would not want to see one of the parents with whom they once had a very close relationship, and I sort of found out more about it and became interested in it, and wrote an article. That seems to be an entree to all these things, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another, and it just became fascinating, really, and tragic at the same time, but that's really how I got involved.
What's your professional degree?
I have a combined degree of anthropology and psychology, actually. So I'm a little bit of a different academic background.
Mm. And you were, you studied together or with Dr. Gardner?
Yes. What happened was I'd become involved and interested in this topic and had written a few things about it, and then got invited to be on the Scientific and Professional Advisory Board of the Parental Alienation Research Foundation in Washington, D.C. So I actually went to Washington, and that's where I met Dr. Gardner and Randy Rand and Deirdre Rand and Richard Warshak and a lot of the people that are the familiar names. And then from that, he became involved in a case I was involved in. He and I did an evaluation together, and he was a very easy person to approach, and very interested and tireless too. I remember I would get emails from him at 1 in the morning, and then a follow-up phone call at 7 o'clock that same morning. And he was a tireless guy, interesting guy, great sense of humor, good guy.
Good. So the white storks.
Yes,
storks.
Yes, we've been hearing those.
So yes. Yeah. How could you, both of you, define, the PAS?
My short version is, PAS, parental alienation, is any time a parent speaks badly about another parent where the child can hear it. And I think that's alienating a parent, putting the parent in a bad light. Parent alienation syndrome is where the child has heard so much of this and relentlessly and loses their reference point of the positive relationship that they had with this parent, and eventually crosses over and aligns with the most disturbed parent against the targeted parent.
And I mean, really, the reason they do that, it's a fear-based thing. They're afraid. They're essentially taught that the other parent has abandoned them, and they're put in a divided loyalty situation where they feel like they've lost one, so they gravitate towards the other, and then that becomes the avalanche. I think the thing with the whole parental alienation syndrome, and he's the one, Gardner is the one that coined that, of course. I think he was one of those clinicians that had the ability to sort of see patterns there just almost intuitively. And he described these 8 symptoms that really very predictably show the unfolding of how this all develops. And
all development.
Yeah, it really does. It's remarkably predictive in that regard. That's why, I wrote an article that says Parental Alienation Syndrome, how to detect it and what to do about it. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten calls saying, oh my gosh, it sounds like you've been looking in on my life. And I said, well, it's just because this is so very tightly patterned. And I think Gardner really nailed that very well. Since that time, Amy Baker, who's done some quantitative research on that, before she published her book, I read the manuscript and I spoke with her and I said, it sounds like you're really confirming exactly what Gardner said. And she said, well, not about. That's exactly what I'm doing. He was right on the money as far as being able to describe it.
And it's interesting that no matter how many people have come up with new versions or new ways of carving something out for themselves, nobody argues with those 8 criteria of what is parent alienation syndrome.
If you look, as a matter of fact, if you look at the Joan Kelly, Janet Johnson, if you look at their formulation of child alienation, it really is a lot of the same things, just in different words, but it's the same, really the same pattern.
Right.
Could you tell us what are these 8 symptoms?
Oh, boy, I have to list them all. I always forget one or two.
Well, the most important ones.
The first one that's always the campaign of denigration. That's when the child is engaged in a campaign of denigration against the other parent. One thing that you find when children are in the midst of their parents' divorce, they don't want to take sides. If you're doing an evaluation of a child going through that, and you try to find some sort of sense of which parent they're more aligned with, when this is not going on, children will keep their head down. They don't want to take sides. And this is just the opposite of that. It's being engaged in denigrating one parent, which is just really kind of fundamentally unnatural. That's very...
the most basic and the most important one of the 8.
Yes. The second one I happen to remember is weak and frivolous rationalizations for the campaign of denigration. So someone will say, during an evaluation, you might say to a child, well, how come you don't want to see your mom or your dad? And they'll say, well, their house is too messy.
Yeah.
Their house is too clean. Mm-hmm. I had one child say, well, all they want to do is take me to Disney World. I said, what?
Something terrible.
But I said, what? Could you repeat that, please? You're going to have to explain that. It was, so, yeah.
I understand. Well, would you consider the PAS as a child trauma or mistreatment? I think it can be considered that way?
Both.
Or more than that?
It's horrific because you're causing children to lose their critical thinking. And it is programming, it's brainwashing, it's taking over the child's personhood, their sense of self and who they are in relation to their family and the world. They're losing 1/2 of their heritage. They're losing their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, the family friends, the culture that they come from, and they're stuck with the most disturbed person that is robbing them of this opportunity.
I think, I absolutely agree with all that. I think another thing, every child I've ever seen that has ever been in this situation, if you ask the right questions, there's a universal theme that you see over and over again, and that is they are basically taught that the parent that they are alienated